Welcome to our deep dive into Robert Sapolsky's Determined.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep on a big one today,
This
folks.
is a big one.
The science and philosophy of free will,
Hmm.
or rather the
Yeah.
case against it.
Sapolsky really does an incredible job in this book.
He does.
He blends together scientific evidence with philosophical insights,
Right.
often with a touch of humor, too,
Yes.
to kind of present this thought-provoking argument against the idea that we are truly in control of our own decisions.
So he's not pulling any punches.
Not at all.
One of the most compelling arguments he uses is this analogy of
Oh,
turtles all the way down
right.
to illustrate how every choice we make,
Mm-hmm.
even something as simple as like picking up a pen,
Right.
can be traced back to a chain of biological and environmental influences.
Exactly like if you're trying to find the bottom turtle that's holding up the world.
Oh, wow.
There's no ultimate source of individual agency,
Right.
and this chain of influences includes everything from our genes and hormones to childhood experiences,
Right.
cultural background,
Wow.
and even events happening moments before a decision.
So, okay,
Yeah.
no magical you making choices in isolation
Nope.
really makes you question those everyday decisions,
Yeah.
like what to have for breakfast.
Right.
He also brings up that famous Libet experiment,
Yeah.
which supposedly proved that our brains decide before we're consciously aware of it.
All right.
It just blows your mind.
It really challenges our intuitive sense of how decision-making works,
Yeah.
but there is a crucial distinction here.
Okay.
The Libet experiment focused on very simple choices,
I see.
like pushing a button.
Uh-huh.
Sapolsky calls this picking
Oh, picking.
rather than choosing.
Versus choosing. So like grabbing a coffee cup
Right.
versus deliberating over a career change.
Exactly. Two very different levels of mental heavy lifting.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So the simple choices measured in the Libet experiment might not reflect the complexity of choices with real-life consequences,
Right.
which often involve multiple brain areas and longer time frames.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if the Libet experiment doesn't completely settle the debate,
Yeah.
it does make you wonder about the role of conscious awareness
Hopefully.
in our decisions.
Absolutely. And that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Sapolsky dives into much deeper waters,
Deeper waters.
like how seemingly random interactions can produce predictable patterns.
Yeah.
The influence of factors like fetal environment
Right.
on our decision-making,
Uh-huh.
and even what slime molds can teach us about complex systems.
Okay, slime molds now, that caught my attention too.
Yeah.
What's the connection there?
Well, think of slime molds as these single-celled organisms that can solve complex problems,
Right.
like navigating mazes without a centralized brain.
Without a brain.
Yeah, it's wild.
So they're making what look like smart choices,
Yeah.
but without any conscious thought.
It's more that these simple rules,
Yeah.
consistently applied,
Right.
can lead to surprisingly complex
Right.
and seemingly intelligent behavior.
So starting to see how he dismantles this idea of our choices.
Yes.
Coming from some mystical source of free will.
Yeah.
He systematically points to the influence of biology, environment,
Right.
and even the laws of physics.
And that leads to huge questions about how we view things like responsibility,
Right.
justice,
Yeah.
and even the very nature of being human.
It really shakes things up,
It does.
especially when it comes to the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
If we're not truly responsible for our actions,
Right.
what does that mean for punishment
Mm.
or rehabilitation?
That's where Sapolsky explores alternative models like restorative justice,
I see.
which prioritizes repairing harm and reconciliation
Okay.
rather than punishment.
So he also looks at how the understanding of neurological conditions has evolved,
Right.
like epilepsy,
Right.
right? It went
Point.
from demonic possession to a moral failing.
Right.
To finally
Yes.
a recognized medical condition.
Exactly. And that shift
Yeah.
reflects a growing recognition that certain behaviors
Mm-hmm.
are rooted in biology,
Wow.
not some personal choice or defect.
But how does this apply to situations where someone knowingly puts themselves and others at risk?
Okay.
Like driving with a seizure disorder.
Right.
If there's no free will,
Yeah.
how do we hold them accountable?
That gets to the heart of the complexity here.
Yeah.
Sapolsky argues that even the choice to drive,
Uh-huh.
knowing the risk,
Okay.
is still shaped by a combination of biological and environmental factors.
Oh, I see.
It might be impaired judgment from the disorder itself,
Okay.
medication side effects,
Right.
or even something as basic as low blood sugar that day.
So It's not about excusing the behavior,
Right.
but understanding the web of influences
Exactly.
leading to that moment.
This raises important questions about how a justice system might factor in determinism. Should the focus shift to preventing harm
Right.
rather than seeking retribution?
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance individual accountability
Yeah.
with the understanding that everyone's actions
Right.
are influenced by factors beyond their immediate control?
It's a whole new way of thinking about justice.
It is.
And speaking of changing perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
Sapolsky also tackles the implications of determinism
Yeah.
for morality and religion.
Right, because a common argument against determinism
Yeah.
is that if we lack free will,
Okay.
then morality crumbles.
Uh-huh.
What's the point of being good if everything is predetermined?
Right. It does make you wonder,
Yeah.
if it's all set in stone, why not just embrace those
Yeah.
devil on the shoulder impulses?
But Sapolsky points to studies showing that atheists are just as morally inclined as
Right.
religious folks,
Okay.
and belief in free will doesn't reliably predict ethical behavior.
So it's not about having a external set of rules or the threat of punishment, but something more inherent to being human.
He suggests morality could be grounded in things like empathy,
I see.
compassion,
Right.
and a desire for a better society.
Okay.
These values can exist regardless of whether we believe in free will.
It's like we still have that internal struggle
Whoa.
between different impulses,
Totally.
even if we aren't making a free choice
Right.
in the traditional sense.
Exactly. We still experience those internal conflicts,
Right.
desires,
Right.
and motivations.
Right.
Determinism doesn't turn us into emotionless robots.
I see.
It simply proposes that our actions emerge from a complex interplay of factors,
Okay.
some conscious and some not.
So maybe the real question isn't whether we have free will,
Yeah.
but how we live with this new understanding
Exactly.
that our choices are part of a larger chain of events.
And that's a question that goes way beyond the realm of science and philosophy,
Wow.
impacting everything from how we raise our children to how our legal system functions.
It's a lot to digest, for sure.
It is a lot.
Before we dive into even more,
Mm-hmm.
let's take a moment to let all of this sink in.
Take a breath.
What's striking you as the most thought-provoking idea so far?
That's a good question.
What really sticks with me is that recognizing our lack of free will
Yeah.
doesn't have to lead to despair or giving up.
Right.
It could actually help us develop a deeper understanding of ourselves and each other,
I love that.
maybe even leading to greater compassion.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
It can be both liberating and challenging.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new set of questions
Mm-hmm.
about living meaningful and ethical lives,
Right.
even if we aren't the sole authors of our choices.
And that leads us to the next part of our deep dive.
Yes.
Where we'll explore how determinism plays out in our personal lives,
Okay.
relationships, and what it truly means to be human.
Let's do it.
One thing that really struck me about Sapolsky's writing is
Yeah?
how he brings these complex ideas to life.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't just present a dry academic argument.
Right.
He weaves in personal stories,
Mm-hmm.
historical examples, even pop culture references to
Yeah.
make it all relatable.
It's a real talent of his.
Yeah.
For example, when he's explaining how our brains might be amplifying quantum randomness,
Okay, right.
a potential loophole for free will,
Right.
he brings up the infinite monkey theorem.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that idea that if you give 1,000,000 monkeys 1,000,000 typewriters,
Uh-huh.
they'll eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare.
If you give them enough time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a fun way to illustrate how randomness doesn't equal agency. Just
Yeah.
because something is unpredictable doesn't mean it's the result of conscious choice.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder about all those random decisions we make,
Mm-hmm.
like picking a restaurant or a movie.
Right.
Maybe it's just those quantum monkeys at work.
Perhaps, but the key point is,
Yeah.
even with a sprinkle of randomness,
Okay.
our choices are still constrained
Right.
by a multitude of factors outside our conscious control.
So, zooming out from the individual,
Yeah.
how does all this apply to society and culture?
Okay.
Sapolsky spends a lot of time exploring how our environments shape our values, beliefs,
Right.
even our sense of morality.
That's where we get into the territory of cultural determinism.
I see.
The idea that our cultures program us with specific ways of thinking and behaving.
Okay.
He explores how different ecosystems can shape cultural values, influencing everything from religious beliefs to moral judgments.
Wow.
Take, for instance,
Yeah.
individualist cultures,
Right.
which emphasize personal autonomy and achievement,
Okay.
versus collectivist cultures
Yeah.
that prioritize social harmony and group identity.
It's fascinating how these differences can manifest in the brain.
It is.
He mentions a study showing that East Asians, compared to Westerners,
Huh.
tend to have higher activity
Right.
in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's CEO.
Right, responsible for planning and self-control.
And making decisions.
Yeah. Benefit the group.
It highlights how culture shapes not just our thoughts and behaviors,
Yeah.
but the underlying neural processes, too.
Makes you wonder if understanding these cultural differences could help us bridge divides
Right.
and build empathy between groups.
It's a powerful idea.
It is.
If we can acknowledge that our own values and beliefs
Right.
are shaped by our cultural upbringing,
Yeah.
we might be less quick to judge or demonize those who hold different views.
And our cultures are constantly evolving,
Yes, they are.
especially with globalization and the internet, exposing us to more diverse perspectives than ever before.
Right.
How do we make sense of this cultural mixing pot?
It's certainly complex.
Yeah.
But remember Sapolsky's point about chaotic systems,
Okay.
like weather patterns or cultural trends?
Uh-huh.
They can be deterministic, yet unpredictable.
Yeah.
Small changes
Right.
can snowball into vastly different outcomes over time.
So chaos theory.
Chaos theory, exactly. Think of that butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil
Yes.
and causing a tornado in Texas.
The classic example.
So even though cultures are in constant flux,
Yeah.
there are still underlying rules and patterns at play.
Exactly. As we learn more about these rules
Okay.
through fields like cultural neuroscience and social psychology,
Right.
we start to see how even seemingly random cultural shifts
Yeah.
are actually the result of complex deterministic forces.
But here's the question that keeps popping up for me.
Okay.
If our cultures are so powerful in shaping who we are, does that mean we're trapped? Is there any room for individual agency if
Well,
we're essentially products of our environment?
That's the age-old debate.
Yeah.
Sapolsky acknowledges that cultural determinism can feel limiting,
Right.
but he also points out that cultures aren't static.
Uh-huh.
They're constantly evolving,
Right.
and individuals can contribute to that evolution.
So it's not about denying the influence of culture,
No.
but understanding how we can work within it.
Exactly.
Create change.
And that brings us to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore the practical and ethical implications of determinism
Right.
in our everyday lives.
Okay, so we're painting this picture of ourselves as walking sacks of deterministic processes.
Right.
But does that mean striving for self-improvement is pointless?
Well, not at all.
Should we just throw in the towel and let our genes and environment just dictate our lives?
Sapolsky might argue against free will in the traditional sense,
Right.
but he's very clear that this doesn't negate our capacity for growth and change.
Okay.
We can still learn, adapt, and consciously work towards self-improvement.
It's like we're playing a hand of cards.
Yeah.
We didn't choose, but
But
we still have agency in how we play those cards.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
We may not have picked our starting point, but we
Yeah.
can still make strategic decisions and influence the course of our lives
Okay.
within the constraints of our biology and environment.
But if our willpower itself is a product of those constraints, how do we explain those stories of incredible human resilience? You know, where people overcome incredible odds to achieve something extraordinary.
Yeah.
Doesn't that suggest some level of free will breaking through?
Well, Sapolsky dives into the neuroscience of willpower,
Okay.
explaining that it's not some magical force,
Right.
but a function of the prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
It's the brain region responsible for planning decision-making
Yeah.
and impulse control.
And as we've discussed, the prefrontal cortex itself
Yeah.
is shaped by a lifetime of experiences and influences.
Exactly.
So even our capacity for willpower is determined.
In a way, yeah.
It's a bit of a mind-bending concept.
It is, but that doesn't diminish its power or reality.
Okay.
Understanding the factors that contribute to willpower, things like sleep,
Right.
stress, and social support,
Yeah.
can help us harness it more effectively.
It's a good reminder that
Yeah.
even though we don't have free will in the absolute sense,
Right.
it doesn't mean we're powerless. We can still make choices that align with our values and goals,
Right.
even if those values and goals themselves are ultimately a product of our deterministic past.
Yeah.
It all feels a bit circular, doesn't it?
It does, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
A key takeaway from Sapolsky
Mm-hmm.
is that recognizing our lack of free will shouldn't lead to nihilism or apathy,
Right.
but to greater compassion and understanding.
That's a bit counterintuitive. Why
Yeah.
would that be the case?
Because if we truly understand that everyone's actions,
Mm-hmm.
even our own,
Yeah.
are the result of a long chain of influences beyond our immediate control,
Right.
it becomes much harder to judge or blame others.
I see.
We're all just playing the hand we've been dealt.
That's a huge perspective shift.
It is.
And makes me think about all those times I've felt angry or frustrated with someone for what I saw as a bad decision.
Right.
Maybe instead of judging, I should try to understand the factors that brought them to that point.
It's a challenging practice, but incredibly transformative.
Yeah.
Sapolsky argues this shift in perspective can lead to greater empathy,
Okay.
more forgiving relationships,
Right.
and a more just and compassionate society as a whole.
And what about turning that lens inward?
Okay.
If we stop blaming ourselves for past mistakes,
Hmm.
does that mean we're off the hook
Right.
for making better choices in the future?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Sapolsky emphasizes that recognizing our lack of free will
Yeah.
doesn't erase responsibility.
Okay.
It simply means we need to find new ways to hold ourselves accountable that don't rely on blame or punishment.
I see.
He suggests focusing on making amends for harm caused,
Okay.
learning from our mistakes,
Yeah.
and working towards a better future.
It's a more nuanced, more compassionate approach to accountability.
It is.
It reminds us that even if our past choices weren't truly free, we can still make different choices now.
Exactly. Determinism doesn't negate our capacity for change or growth, right? It means we need to become more aware of the factors influencing our choices and find new ways to align our actions with our values.
It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking journey through Sapolsky's Determined.
It has.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what final thought would you leave our listener with?
I'd encourage them to consider this.
Okay.
If you could design a justice system that fully embraced the idea of no free will,
Wow.
what would it look like?
Yeah.
What would be its goals,
Right.
its methods, the ethical implications?
That's a powerful question to ponder.
It is.
It reminds us that while the science and philosophy of free will can be complex,
Right.
the implications are deeply personal
Yes.
and profoundly impactful.
It's a journey of self-discovery that can change how we view ourselves,
Yeah.
relate to others,
Mhm.
and navigate the world around us.
Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been an incredibly insightful exploration, and for our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of determinism. Keep exploring these ideas and see how they shape your understanding of yourself and the world around you.